Hello, welcome to Beyond the Edge. I'm your host, Brandy Deutsch.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee DeMayo, your co-host. Light, love, and blessings, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year! Yay! A new year, a brand new start. I'm super excited. Didi and I were just talking about how lots of changes are happening for people, and that is not a lie. Everybody's just kind of getting in this new situation and new energy, and it's so exciting. I'm really just so jazzed about what's happening for the new year. And with that, today we're going to be talking about intentional community exploration. And intentional communities have been around for a really long time. I'm just blown away at how incredibly widespread this is. And our guest today is going to talk more about it with us. Her name is Cynthia Tina, and she is a community matchmaker. She helps people join the hundreds of intentional communities that she's visited and worked with around the globe. She's a speaker and educator and co-director of the Foundation for Intentional Community, IC.org. And she has this incredible mission and strength to bridge the gap between sustainable communities and mainstream society. I mean, is that cool or what? I'm just like, what? And she lives in an eco village in Vermont. She's building a passive solar home and intending a garden and guiding yoga classes. And she has her bachelor's degree in sustainability from Goddard College, as well as certifications in eco village and permaculture design. I didn't even know that was a thing. And she's going to talk more with us about it. Cynthia, welcome to our show. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Brandy and Dee Dee. It's really great to be here.
So I saw you speak at a summit. It was like a grow and build type thing, and I was super excited to hear what you had to say because I'm not knowledgeable in intentional communities at all. I know they exist. I have friends that live on a couple, but I was really excited to hear what you were talking about. And you really are an educator. I love the way you speak about intentional communities because it does come from an educational standpoint. And what I really want to know, how did you get started in intentional communities?
Yeah. So I did not grow up in an intentional community. I grew up with a pretty normal family outside of Boston in the suburbs. But I had, as a child, this innate curiosity about other ways of living. I spent a lot of time in nature, in the woods, and I started a garden at an early age and was a voracious reader. So I was always reading books about different ways of life, people who were more self-sufficient, people who were more connected with indigenous ways of living, and people who were living more communally. So at age 15, I convinced my mom to let me travel to North Carolina, and I visited my first intentional community. I didn't know that term at the time, but on reflection, that was definitely what it was. And gosh, it was eye-opening that there's a way of life where people are relating to each other in much more deep and authentic ways. They're maybe growing their own food, producing their own energy, just much more in touch with ways to be resilient. And this kicked me off on really a global journey of visiting intentional communities, eco-village, co-housing communities, permaculture centers. And I feel that through that journey, I have gained so much that now I want to give back and share with more people. So
Beautiful. That is awesome. What a great story. You do think about these things and go, I wonder if she grew up on that kind of in that kind of environment. And to know that you didn't, but you followed your heart and your intuition and it led you to that. And now it's like your career. So now it's your life. That's really incredible. So so how did you get involved and get started with intentional community in community.org? We'll talk more about that, but I want to know how you kind of got involved with the whole um, foundational or organizational aspect of intentional community.
yeah, the network. So there's a few different organizations that are supporting eco-village, co-housing communities, and intentional communities globally. And so actually the first organization I got involved with is the Global Eco-Village Network. You can find them at ecovillage.org. And this is a worldwide organization. I was traveling in Switzerland and attended a conference. Every summer, there is a European Eco-Village conference. So, of course, I was researching eco-villages. That's part of what I did my undergraduate in. And I found this conference, decided to go. It was on top of an Alp in Switzerland. Schwabenalp is actually the name of the community. And people from all different parts of Europe who were living in eco-villages themselves or interested in it were gathering at this conference. And that's where I was like, oh, I want to get involved with this in a more formal way, more in that organizational level. And from there, I worked with a few different other groups. And today I'm mostly focused on the Foundation for Intentional Community, FIC. And our website is ic.org. And we're doing a whole bunch of online courses, events, tons of resources, and of course that map, that directory of intentional communities.
That's exciting. So when you go to when our audience, when they go to the website ic.org, they're going to see a really interesting way to just search out these communities. Can you define intentional community for me? I mean, the first thing that enters a person's head when you say intentional community is commune, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's these common misconceptions about what an intentional community is. Can you kind of explain a little bit of what that actually is?
Totally. It's a great question. It does not mean commune, although that is one type of intentional community. There's just a few of them. Most intentional communities are very well connected with the mainstream, very normal people living in fully functioning built environments. And the definition of an intentional community is a group of people who live together or share resources on the basis of explicit common values. So unlike maybe a retirement community in Florida, let's say, where people are living together, but they don't have underlying values that bring them together. And also it's worth mentioning, we're mostly talking about place-based or residential communities. Of course, you can have online intentional communities, but for our purposes, we're talking about places where people live together.
Geographical locations. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it. Excellent. With that definition, of shared values, it sounds like you're talking about just people who really have the same kinds of maybe morality thinking, or could it be health based, it could be, I guess, all like religion. I think Mormons kind of come up in the back of my head when I think about that kind of intentional community. But there's all kinds of ways in which I guess people can consider what values they want to share. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can have spiritual communities, religious, secular communities, communities like a lot of co-housing communities where the focus is simply on having more social connection and recognizing loneliness and our isolation as a really big problem and working to address that through co-housing communities. You can also have ecological communities. Those are more like the eco-villages or permaculture-based communities. So yeah, you name it, there's an intentional community around it.
I'm curious because we were talking about this before the show. I mentioned, the regular brick and mortar sidewalks and stores and all that kind of stuff as far as communities. Each little housing subdivision has an HOA, which, they're the elected powers that be that really have no power. But do y'all have things like that in intentional communities where, if, say, y'all accept someone in a community, what kind of screening process is there? What kind of commitment? I'm curious about that because a lot of people, first they're going to look at it, well, it's a setup. You want all my stuff because you want shared resources. Just different questions come to mind. What are the steps to becoming involved as a permanent community member? How do you resolve issues and things like that?
Oh yeah, Oh, there's a lot of good questions in there.
Just
So
pick one.
yeah. So I think it's important to emphasize like all intentional communities are different. And so the membership process, the legal structure looks really different depending on what community you're involved with. And even some communities use the HOA model, like that legal structure, but they build a lot more community agreements around it and conflict resolution agreements around it. So normally when you're thinking of joining an intentional community, you could think of it as not quite the same as applying for a job or applying to join a school. It's really about building a relationship with a group of people. And so that can take time. You take time to visit multiple intentional communities, you build up rapport, maybe go through the initial steps of a membership process, like taking a tour, joining a work party day. And then at a certain point, you make a commitment to either rent a home or purchase a home, or like I am, building a home in an intentional community. And at that stage, there's a really clear, spelled out, written agreement. You know how you're joining, you know how you leave the community. It's not like you're locked into some sort of cult. It's very much a transparent process, hopefully.
So I'm curious too, because you said you could rent, but then you also have the option to build. Do you find that because it's a shared resources that expenses aren't as outrageous for a person to live well and comfortable?
Yeah, they
You know,
can be.
because yeah.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah, it can be a lot more affordable to live in an intentional community. It depends, like, you can find some co-housing communities that are more expensive than the market rate, but you get so much more for that. A lot of
Mhm.
shared amenities, a common kitchen, maybe a swimming pool, common space. So you're getting more for your dollar in that sense. But yeah, especially rural intentional communities, it can be considerably more affordable
Mhm.
because we're sharing resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sharing also your skills and your ability to work within the community. I would think that being able to um, share in the responsibilities of the community would not only keep costs down, but also build those relationships that you're talking about, right?
Oh, totally. For sure. Like for me, building my house in a community, gosh, I couldn't imagine if I was just doing the same project just off there on my own. Having the ability to borrow tools from my neighbor and get advice from someone and just have this great feeling of support. And
Mhm.
also in our community, we have a lot of families with young children, and them being able to play with each other, having many babysitters around, like just that childcare need being met in a much more human or almost primal way is beautiful to see.
I was just thinking that. I was thinking, what an ideal situation for a single parent who struggles in the what in our Western culture to come to a community where you know, like he or she can really support their child and help them grow, and also have help. I mean, it
Mhm.
takes a village, you know,
Yeah.
like that's true.
Yeah.
So we touched on something that I have a burning question about. You mentioned loneliness and how these intentional communities can really help with that, with the epidemic that we're having of loneliness. And one of the groups that are hit most hard with that, I think, is our older populations. And I'm kind of passionate about the way that we in the Western cultures have treated our elderly populations, and I'm wondering what would it look like for someone who's in their sunset years to be involved in intentional community. Maybe they don't have a lot of skills or resources. Maybe they can't do as much physically, but maybe they can offer something in other ways. What does that look like for an older person in an intentional community?
Yeah, great question. And you're so right that we are in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. Even before this COVID pandemic, people were increasingly becoming isolated, and that has serious health effects. And so true for our elderly. There's something I've noticed in the intentional communities movement that we tend to call the elderly elders. which is a much more respectful term, and gets back to that concept of the village, where we all have things we can contribute, and certainly our elders have a lot of wisdom, life experience, and perspective they can offer. So there are intentional communities, of course, that are multi-generational, where you have all the way from the little babies up to the grandparents, and going through an end of life process in an intentional community can be really beautiful and well held. We also, though, have intentional communities that are senior communities, so 55 years and up. And it's not the same as a retirement community. It's really an intentional senior community. So there's a much greater degree of connection and intentionality, consciousness in going through that aging in place and aging in community. And then we also have a few intentional communities that are really designed around elders specifically. I'm thinking particularly of a Rudolf Steiner community in New York State, where they are set up to give hospice, end of life care, but also just a beautiful, what you called sunset years for our elders. And the entire intentional community has this as their main focus. So it can look a variety of ways, but certainly different than the Western model.
That sounds amazing. I mean, that really sounds amazing, as an alternative to what we've kind of done here in Western culture, and just, putting our most valuable, what I consider our most valuable population, our children and our seniors, in a place where they can't really thrive. And the end of life process is so important to how we move forward, I think, even as a society. But I digress, because I have a lot of passion around those kinds of things. The other thing that I know, that because you said, you talked about that Rudolf Steiner community up in New York State. I also know that you had mentioned in your talk a community of autistic individuals.
Wow.
And I was very curious about that and how that looks for people who have autistic children, or autistic adult children, who are looking for a more understanding and more kind of community that understands their needs and their struggles and their challenges. Was there one or two communities like that you had mentioned before?
Yeah, so I probably talked about the Camp Hill Community Network, and these are intentional communities for individuals with autism, but more broadly, individuals with mental and physical disabilities. And there are over 100 of these communities in the United States and in Europe. I've been fortunate enough to spend time visiting one, and it was an incredibly moving experience, especially when we talk about inclusivity. Like, these are some of the most marginalized members of our society, and giving them a place where they are truly part of a community of people with and without disabilities who are working together, having jobs, going to school, like really having full and rich lives. So that's an incredible example. I would say for people who have maybe autism or other forms of neurodiversity, there's like a few intentional communities that are forming around this intention. One in Portland, Oregon, our home Cathedral Park. And then there's another really great one, it's a little bit older, in Alaska, called Ionia. And both of these communities are putting forward, okay, mental illness doesn't have to be something in the shadows. There are ways that we can find healing collectively and support each other.
Wow,
That's amazing.
That's really amazing. I mean, and my first thought is, people don't know that this exists. They don't know that this is something that they can do, and that's a choice. And I'd really, really love to see this kind of thing get more commonplace in our world, because if it did, wow, what a difference it would make for people in their lives. And community and connection, like, those are the things that really keep us cohesive. And
Mm.
those are the things that really keep us feeling alive and feeling good and feeling like we have purpose, right?
Yeah. It makes me think. I was watching something the other day, and this little, young mom, she was single, and she was just crying and crying and crying. She couldn't even go to the doctor because she didn't have anybody to take care of her child because they don't allow you to take the doctors anywhere. And it's going back to that supportedness of a resource and collective community where they don't feel put out because someone needs your help, you know?
Mm.
That
Yeah.
they see the need and they meet the need. They go in willing with that mindset. It changes a whole lot about life. And I imagine it's much more, um, I don't know, peaceful would be a word, but I think it's bigger than that. I don't have a word that meets that describes it, what I feel.
Mm.
Um, I don't know, utopian kind of thing. I know everything's not always perfect, but you see what I mean about the meeting the need because they see it. They go in knowing that they're going to be able to not only have their needs met but help others.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hearing that, what comes up for me is I would think that maybe intentional communities are not for everyone.
Hmm.
That people who might be a good fit. Can you speak to that? Like, who is someone that might be a good fit for an intentional community?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And it's definitely true that not everyone is a fit, or should I say that I'm not saying that intentional community is like the solution. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned from intentional communities about how we can bring that mindset and that culture and create community wherever we are and get to know our neighbors and feel more comfortable sharing and have deeper conversations. Those are things that you can start to foster whether or not you up and move to a community or start one. So in general, I would say people who are a really good fit for community, you don't have to be a total extrovert. Actually, sometimes we find that introverts are attracted to community more than extroverts because they have a harder time finding connection. And they just want that to be a baked in part of their life where they can open their front door and have people who they feel comfortable going and connecting with. Um, Although that said, if you're someone who's like an extreme introvert or someone who doesn't feel like you want to go to potlucks or help out with projects, like you're really focused on you, and that's fine too. But that may not be such a good fit for community because most intentional communities, even if you have an outside job, do encourage involvement to build up that shared culture. Some communities have a minimum, like a few hours a week of volunteer time, or you have to be part of, cooking a meal once a week or once a month. And then I would say also people who aren't comfortable going along with group agreements. Like, I think especially in the United States where private property is such a strong thing, we feel maybe entitled or like we can do whatever we want with our home and our land. And in community, there's a lot more group decisions, and that can take time. And you don't always agree with your neighbor, and you have to talk through things. And there's certain people who are more ready and willing to do that process than others. So those are the big things that come up for me.
Yeah, I remember seeing someone else speaking at that summit who talked about their decision making process. And one of the things he said a lot of very interesting things, but not everything has to be a democratic process. And so the way that they structured things, I forgot what he called it, but it was really different from the way that we make decisions. And knowing that there are different ways of making decisions about shared property and shared responsibilities was actually really encouraging for me, because I like knowing that we have choices, and the choice to be able to feel heard and seen around something that you're involved with is actually really important for a lot of people. So having that kind of involvement in what you're in what you're living and what you're what you're connecting with in your community, I think could be very, very valuable. Maybe not everybody would see it that way, right? Like, right? Nobody's going to tell me what to do with my property. I was like, yeah, okay. So you're right. If there are that kind of mindset, maybe it's not the best environment. But it's good to know that, and that's why it's really great to go and have a look at these places. So, Cynthia, how can people, one, get in touch with you, and two, have an experience of intentional community that they can kind of explore?
So my website, cynthiatina.com, is the best way to get in touch with me. Tina is my last name, interestingly enough. And I am a matchmaker for people who are looking to join an intentional community and want recommendations for places that may be a good fit for them specifically based on what they're looking for and their needs, their values. So that would be an excellent way to get started. You can also go to ic.org and just experience that big, beautiful map of the over 1,000 intentional communities that we have in our directory, and reach out to some. Maybe you have some near you. Maybe you want to take a trip, plan a communities tour, and just get started visiting them. We also have a lot of resources on our website, online events and courses if you're wanting to connect with this movement but don't feel quite ready or able to travel. Those are also wonderful options.
Excellent, excellent, wonderful. These are amazing resources, and what I know about ic.org is you can go on and just explore that website, and it'll keep you busy for days because there's a lot of information. There's like want ads and information about intentional communities, but there's also like little features where you can go kind of look at their websites and their communities. And I was just fascinated. I'm just really, really excited about the prospect of people living differently than what they have and what they've always known, because that's it. That's all they've ever known. Do you go speak to groups, Cynthia? Do you go to like maybe corporations or groups and speak to them about intentional communities?
Yeah, for sure. I do that, and hoping to do more and more of that. So.
Excellent. Well, we're hoping to get the word out for you. Dee Dee, do you have any more questions for Cynthia?
Well, I thought it was interesting earlier, first part of the show, she had mentioned going as a teenager. So I was curious about that. How do they still have communities that accept teenagers on a summer like internship or whatever? So I guess on ic.org we could find out information about that, or like if y'all do mother daughter, like travel retreats or things like that. So it's a lot of ideas popped in my head, just because as an older person and talking about that too, the value of things I know are getting lost as generations go on about the simpler things in life, the more common values that just they don't even know how to have a conversation about. And I'm like, wow, okay. And I think that having the ability to go somewhere even for a weekend or a week might be a good thing for a lot of people that have teens that need to see something different.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I so recommend checking out intentional communities as a young person or a parent with a child. It for myself as a young person, it was truly formative and eye-opening in terms of expanding my horizons. So each intentional community is different. Our organization doesn't have like a program that we have overarching. But yeah, definitely checking out the websites of different communities. A lot of communities accept work exchange programs or internships. So fabulous, fabulous ways to
Oh, wow.
learn.
Amazing.
Awesome. Cynthia, thank you so much for coming onto the show today and for speaking about intentional communities. I feel like people are a little more educated about it and they have a little more information that they can go by and great resources. And thank you for what you do. I think it's amazing
Yeah.
that you can help people connect with a different way of life and connect with their people, their peeps, as we
Yeah.
like to say, and just enjoy life in a different way. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you, what you do for others, and just we appreciate all that you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Stay
Yeah.
tuned for more shows, people. Thank you.
Yeah, stay tuned, guys.
All right. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Cynthia. Bye bye.